Okay, for today's build we'll need a couple pieces. First is our main body, the middle strip, the support, our divider piece for the middle, some side pieces, and also our strap attachments. And once we've got all that pieces assembled, we're ready to go. And as usual, you probably might have already guessed it, we'll need to start beveling and burnishing our pieces. And I notice here I didn't sharpen my beveler so far, so I really recommend you to do that before every project. And I just take some jeweler's rouge, strap it down a little bit, and it feels as good as new. And now, with that out of the way, let's really start beveling and burnishing. And I'll skip over most of the burnishing here because it's really not that interesting to look at. But if you want to know more about my burnishing techniques or how I approach it, let me know down in the comments. And now that we got that out of the way, I'm gonna start with the strap attachments, where I'm just gonna mark a 1 centimeter line with my wing divider. And then we want to thin out the edges, and for that I'm just gonna use my French skiver, but you can also use a normal skiving knife if you want. And it's mainly just to reduce the bulk on the edge of our sling bag later on. And now, while this next step is optional, I do think it helps to give your bag a nice clean look and also assemble the sides more easily. So what I'm gonna do is take my groove cutter, and on the dashed line indicated on the pattern, I'm just gonna cut a line on the back side. And that will help for them to fall in place properly later on. Next up, I want to prepare the middle strip on our main body piece. And here I just want to give you a little pointer, because for this build I'm using these lock closures, which are similar to buttons, but I will push them all the way through the middle strip and the main body. But the build is also made in a way that you can use normal magnetic buttons, for example, if you want, but then you only need to be a little bit careful about where you actually put them in. So when I wrap around the main body here, you can see how it will fall later on. So if you're using a magnetic button, you want the lower part to sit on top of the middle strip and the upper part of the magnetic button to sit below the middle strip, so they will connect properly later on, and you will still not see any of the backside from your magnetic buttons. Otherwise, you can also use a normal button or these locks closures that I'm using as well. But with that out of the way, I'll just continue to attach the middle strip to my main body. For that I'm just using some white glue, and then we can put it on the middle of our main body, so make sure it's really nice and centered. Again, I indicated you the lines on the pattern that you can use as a reference. Then we just make sure it's nice and tight, and then we can leave that to dry while we continue with the other stuff. With that other stuff being our pocket divider, where I want to attach the side pieces on both ends of our divider piece. And while I already got the glue out, I will also prepare our strap attachments, and for that I will just put in the rectangle rings on our strap attachment pieces, and then we can put on some glue and glue them shut before we sew them up later. Once the pieces are dry, we can assemble the sides on our divider piece. And for the way I did it, you want to make sure that the longer side pieces are on the front and the smaller side pieces are on the back. And this will be relevant later on, because as you can see, we will secure the bottoms with a couple of rivets, and you want to make sure they are in the correct position. Otherwise, you can also check out the product images where you can see this more clearly. And then we can start sewing up our side pieces. Then I will just start finishing up those two edges, and afterwards I'm gonna bend out the side pieces so they end up in a 90-degree angle to our divider piece. And after I finished sewing that, my middle strip was also nice and dry, so I will continue on the back side of the main body to also glue in the front support flap. And you can see here I made a little bit of a mess with the glue, but that's not an issue, we can clear that up later on. And once that is in place, I'm just gonna take a standard washer to round off the edges for our front flap, and then we can actually start sewing that part up as well. And for that I just mark our stitch line for the middle strip and also our front flap support, and then start punching and sewing all of that up. And after sewing, I can also punch the hole through the box closure. Again, if you're using a magnetic button, for example, you should really add this before you sew this in place or glue it. But for these box closures, it doesn't really matter. And I just also finished the top edge here because that one will be a little bit hard to reach later on. And then we can already start doing some assembly, although that will only be short-lived, because here I only attach the side pieces to our front, and before we do the other side we will still need to do our shoulder strap. But for now I'll just put this in place here on our front side, glue it in place on both sides, and then we can start sewing that in place. For this build, I'm just using a 4 cm wide fabric shoulder strap, but of course if you want you can also do this with leather. But in terms of how we're constructing it, I'm gonna first take one of these sliders, put it on one of the ends, then I glue that up and also sew it up. If you have a normal household sewing machine, I really recommend you to just use that one. But if you don't have a sewing machine, don't worry, you can basically use the same technique as you would on leather. It's not as clean as on a sewing machine, but it holds very much secure and it does the job. And now that we've got that part attached, we want to go through one of our strap attachments on one side and then wrap it back around our slider through the other end of the slider, and then pull everything through, and then we can attach the other end to our other strap attachment. And that should leave us with a nice adjustable shoulder strap, which only needs to go on our bag. And for that I'm scratching the edges as usual. Then we can put some glue in it and then put it on the correct position on our main body. But before we put in the shoulder straps, I also put glue on the back side and our side pieces, similar to like what we did on the front. And here I already put glue on both of the sides, which probably honestly wasn't the best idea, because when I need to press it down, I'm gonna remove most of the glue. So I just put some more glue on there, and once all that is nice and dry, then we can start putting together the front and the back side here, and make sure we press that down nice and firm. And you want to make sure that they're sitting really close together. So on the bottom there should barely be any gap. And then we want to stitch this up just like we did on our front side. And when you're punching these stitching lines, really make sure you don't have your strap anywhere under there, or you're gonna punch through that and you're gonna be very sad. And I'm totally not saying that because that almost happened to me. And now we want to secure our side pieces on the bottom as well. And for the pattern, what I did here is just to secure it with some rivets. Of course, there's some other techniques how you could also sew the bottom, but personally I also like this style because it really matches the boxy aesthetics, and also in terms of construction it makes it quite a bit easier. If you have some screwable back feet, technically you could even put some back feet in there, but because this is a sling bag, it will mostly be on my shoulder anyway. And now the only tricky part is then to actually secure those rivets in place. But what I'd like to do is just get a small piece of wood, or if you have something similar, you only want to make sure it's a material that is soft enough it doesn't destroy your rivets. But something like plastic or softer wood works perfectly fine. And then I'll just put this under the rivet and then punch it down from the underside. And I've been doing this with some other of my patterns, and honestly I gotta say it's been working great so far. And then we get to our finishing touches. For that, once again, I'll go all over our edges that we have left, and we will bevel and burnish all of them until we are satisfied. And as you can probably see, we're moving towards our finish line. Only part missing for me is to add the other side of the closure. And for that, I'll just punch another hole and add the top part of my lock closure and screw that in place. And that already finishes our sling bag build for this week. As always, I really hope you like it. Check out the pattern on my Etsy store if you did. And with that, I would say see you next time.